And so this is what I want to show you first, or present to you. First of all, I want to give an introduction, which is sort of a little bit philosophical, yeah, why time is so important, not only for philosophy, but also for psychology, for the neuroscience, and it is maybe the missing link for understanding phenomenal consciousness. And I will talk a little bit about the extended present moment experience. Then I will talk about my main field of interest and my research is about embodied sense of time passage. That is actually my answer to the question of how we with our brains process, or we with our brains and body process time. So because the bodily self and time, subjective time, are always up and down regulated, so co-modulated. Then I will talk a little bit about not too much, but a little bit about the consequences of this idea, and then about disordered temporalities in psychiatric patients. And then the last chapter will be talk about altered states of consciousness. Why is that? Because there again, time and self are up and down regulated. And I talk a bit about meditation, floatation-REST, and just one slide about psychedelics. And also a consequence of this could be that one could have healing potentials for these disordered temporalities in psychiatric patients. So first of all, referring to Thomas Metzinger, making now this logical conclusion down here, and he writes in his book, Being No One, but also in other sources, the bodily self, the continuous visceral and proprioceptive input from the body, which is a basis for our mental self, is the functional anchor of phenomenal experience. That's one premise. The other one is phenomenal consciousness consists of an island of presence in the continuous passage of time related to what is happening right now. So there, in this definition, you have actually then two temporal aspects of phenomenal consciousness. One is this, I experience the present moment, this nowness, I am now here in the present moment. So on the island of presence is, you could say, a psychological moment as extended. But also, the second aspect of time is, I experience the passage of time, sequence, change, duration. And if you put these two premises together, then the conclusion then would be the bodily self is the functional anchor of time consciousness. And this is what I want to show empirically. So first of all, I'll give us not too long, but a first quick introduction on this first part of the present moment experience and how one might be able to assess it. And what is the meaning of presence if you talk about this? So the philosophers, let's say, if you think about Husserl and others, are quite aware of this. So the contents of consciousness are phenomenally present now. And nowness is inherent in all our experiences. I see, feel, think at the present moment. And I remember the past and anticipate the future with an extended window of presence now. But this is actually also St. Augustine, if you think about, he actually had already this idea of 1,500 years ago. Then this is a philosophy slide. So why is the experience present extended? So philosophers I don't know why, they like the example of the shooting star. So experience of movement, change, temporal order are only possible in a temporally extended present. So you see the shooting star coming down in the sky, but also, of course, the perception of a melody. You think about the motive of Beethoven's Fifth Symphony, only as a whole gestalt. This musical, making this musical theme makes sense. Of course, also spoken language comprehension. You don't hear individual phonemes. I'm speaking now, but you have them present in a gestalt, to be able to understand what I'm saying. But even the duration of the spoken now, so like 253 milliseconds long. So there is always some sort of extension. And there's these. I'm not talking about, there are many philosophical models, and one model which accompanies this is the extensional model in philosophy, and I've written down some protagonists in philosophy. where the ideas as acts and contents of consciousness are temporally extended. Together with Mauro Dorato from Roma, we wrote a piece where we tried to juxtapose the philosophical models with empirical evidence. At least we tried. I don't know how successful we were. So again, back to Edmund Husserl. So where you have this idea of present moment experience. So he's not an extensionalist, that is important, but still in experience at least, he would say that the experience is extended because it has traits of what has just happened, retention, and what is about to happen, that's protension. And I like Dan Lloyd's, the philosopher Dan Lloyd's example with this Hey Jude. So if you know the Beatles song, if you just hear the voice of Paul McCartney, this hey, and everyone, although the Jude is not yet there, we already anticipated, and we already have this idea, and then when he hits Jude, the hey is of course still there. So because we listen to Hey Jude, so this again says, okay, there is an extensional present moment. And if you, I like Julian Kieferstein's basically summary where he puts the self and time together through this temporal structure of consciousness, the realization of a self emerges. I become aware of myself through memory of what happened to me and anticipation of what might happen to me. And very interesting, we talked about Marcel yesterday, evening, the temporal field, he writes this in this Vorlesungen zur Phenomenologie des inneren Zeitbewusstseins. The temporal field is obviously bounded, just as in perception. By and large, one can perhaps dare to state that the temporal field has always the same extension. Or the same extension, but what is this extension? And he actually says it in a further sentence, but this is something the psychologists have to answer. So, and this will I'll give you a few slides. On this, the present experience is stretched over time, and empirical researchers have to work on this. But what do experimental researchers do? So there's a nice summary of a review of the consciousness theories by Nordhoff and Lamme from 2020, where they try to analyze all the different consciousness models that are there in the cognitive neurosciences. We have predictive coding theory, the integrated information theory, the global neural workspace theory. These are mainly the three dominant models. But together with Lachlan Kent from Australia, we tried to analyze these, and our conclusion was then, with few exceptions, for example, the exception of the Nordhoff model, was that most dominant theories of consciousness only refer to brief, static, and discrete moments in time. Very few refer to extended, dynamic, and continuous time, which is associated with consciousness experience. So time is totally missing in these consciousness models. And this is in this article we try to look at this. But if you look at actually now empirical research happening, there's not much research going on and trying to find out how long, for example, this question Husserl asked or gave to the psychologists, how long is the present moment? There's not much research. Alexei Polunin, this afternoon, he will talk. I'm sure he will talk about this because we have exchanged on these ideas for many years. I'm happy to see what he will present. So I'll just give you one example of what idea, maybe it's not right, but at least this one example of where you could go. And looking at the metronome, actually, just listening to the metronome, tick, tack, tick, tack, tick, tack. And so if it has a certain speed, so you always hear this 1, 2, 1, 2, or 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. But these chunks, integrated units, are not there physically speaking. They're in your mind. Because physically you just have these individual beats going on, and which already shows, okay, somehow the brain binds individual beats together. And then you can, with 1 second interstimulus interval, you still have 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. But then if it gets too long, the interstimulus interval, like 3 seconds, for example, then you suddenly 1, and the 2 doesn't happen anymore, and then you have the next one. So the binding properties of the brain might not stretch over the 2 to 3 seconds. There was an idea that Ernst Pöppel, Beuys, and others And then if you go into sensory motor processing, it's again, so you have to listen to the metronome, tick, 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 and you have to press a button at the same time. It's sensory motor integration, tick, 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 tick. And you can do this quite comfortably. You can even talk to people while you're doing this. Yeah? It's quite automatic. But if again, the interstimulus interval is too long, like 2 to 3 seconds or something, then suddenly, one, then you cannot integrate properly. You're either too early or you do a reaction time after the stimulus. Yeah? So this again shows, so not only passively listening integrates, but also sensory motor integration has this upper limit of a few seconds. Yeah? Another idea is the slowest self-paced movement. This was actually a work from my PhD thesis, is you just please tap at your comfortable pace, self-regulated, and then you do something like this. And very often it's 2 Hertz pace, 500 milliseconds into tap interval. And then you tell people, do your slowest movement possible, which is still comfortable for you. And then it never exceeds 3 seconds. So people do something like this, but it's never slower than this inter-tap interval of 3 seconds. And I give some authors here. But as I said, this is just an idea, and there's not really much empirical research going on. Although William James in 1890 already wrote about this saddleback idea of a few seconds. So the idea is around, but not many empirical research. So now the second part I'm now showing you goes now into the experience of duration, passage of time, where with this embodiment approach. First of all, just a little textbook knowledge. So if you talk about time perception, we can distinguish maybe something like retrospective time perspective, meaning looking back. And there it's quite clear that it's memory contents or the amount of changing experiences that define subjective duration. So very clear, for example, you have a exciting weekend in Rome with friends, and 2 days later you come home and it's so extended. You come home, you feel so much time has passed. That's why, because you have so much emotionally laden experiences. But then they say, or you're at home, not doing nothing much, washing your clothes, and at the end of the weekend, it has passed so fast, because nothing really happened. So that's looking back at time intervals. But I'm concentrating more, and this is very clear with this memory content, as this idea. But I'm talking about prospective time experience. Why prospective? Because you're always heading towards the future, but actually means experiencing time in the present moment over a certain duration. And there, from experimental psychology, one clearly knows it has something to do with attention. So if you attend to time, time passes more slowly, the typical waiting situation. If you are distracted from time, like watching an entertaining movie, we're not attending to time, time passes very fast. But this, I would say, is the mystery of subjective time. The question of, what are we attending to if we say we are attending to time, It doesn't mean the clock. So even without clocks, we still have this attention regulation mechanisms. And the question is, so where do we attend to? And this, one solution I want to give you today. To what do we attend when we attend to time? So again, a little bit textbook knowledge. So the cognitive models of time perception, you always have these boxes and arrows in between. But it's a quite good heuristic. So it's not how the brain works, but it's a good heuristic to understand how we as humans perceive time. But it's also actually an animal timing model. Actually, this model comes from, one strain of research comes from animal timing models who use this model. So there's a pacemaker sending out pulses in an accumulator, and the amount of pulses defines a subjective duration. So that's why 8 seconds last longer subjectively than 4 seconds, because more pulses are accumulated in 8 seconds than in 4 seconds. But only, and that's important, modulator, only if you attend to time, a switch is closed and then the pulses go in. So only if you attend to time, these pulses arise. If you don't attend to time, because we're distracted in an interesting conversation, this switch is not closed, and then the pulses don't accumulate because they cannot reach the accumulator, and then less time has happened subjectively. So that's the attention modulator. A second modulator is the arousal level. So the pacemaker does not always function at the same pace, but could be faster, slower. And the arousal level basically defines if you're totally calm, the pulses come slowly, more slowly into the accumulator. If you're totally agitated, positively or negatively, they arrive in the accumulator more quickly. So this is the cognitive model of time perception. And we meanly tried to test this a little bit, in a real waiting task. So we had a cover story where we had people come into the lab and said, oh, we'll do a computer task with you. But then we said, oh, unfortunately, our computer broke down. Please wait here in this room. And we took off all the watches, cell phones, all material they could use. And you see this very nicely interesting room. And there was nothing there. And then the experimenter, and please wait here until I come back. The experimenter came back exactly 7.5 minutes. So the idea would be, because of the situation, people would totally attend to time, and also the arousal levels would go up because, what am I doing here? When are they coming back? And so the two modulators would be some sort of activator. So this is a method section. So just to compare to what we heard yesterday with these phenomenological interviews. So this would be the most easiest form in psychology to get data, just at a visual analog scale, 10 centimeters long. And then you ask some people questions. So for example, how often did you think about time during the session? And people mark it somewhere here. And then with a ruler, you can just measure, okay, 32 or something like this. This is your number. So between 0 and 100. Or how fast did time pass for you during the session? Same thing. So super easy data collection. This is about time. Then this is about emotion. This is about violence. So from I feel more negative, I felt positive, or how aroused or calm did you feel? Very calm, meditative to very aroused. So very easy, you just mark here and then you've got your numbers. So what we found was then that the more arousal people had, the more thoughts about time. So these were the two modulators of this timing model. The longer subjective duration, we also asked them, how long do you think the time lasted? And the slower passage of time. So nothing really surprising, but at least I think it's the first time in a real waiting situation that we basically assessed this. Okay, so this is the psychology side, but now the next question is where in the and how in the brain. And my idea would be that it's all about the bodily self, so the embodiment of time idea. And I did this in San Diego when I was there for 5 years, between 2004 and 2009, a postdoc position, and in the scanner, fMRI scanner, and I just present you now this task because I'll have it 2 or 3 times later again, the same task, a classic duration reproduction task. So that's from Fechner's day from the 19th century, one of the classic timing tasks. So in this task, they first listen to a certain tone, and we had 3, 9, 18 seconds intervals, durations. Then there was a pause. Then a second tone appeared, and people had to stop the second tone when they thought, now the second tone is as long as the first tone. So you have to reproduce the second tone according to the presentation duration of the first tone, duration reproduction. And what we were able to show was that in one region of the brain, in the insular cortex, we found this increasing activation over time. This is now for the 9 seconds interval. We have this increasing activation, which ended at the end of the to be timed interval. And the same thing with the 18 seconds interval again. So with this increasing activation over time, more activation until the end of the interval. So the idea could be, or the interpretation was then, maybe it's increasing activity in the insular cortex, which codes duration. So more activation, longer duration. And so what is the insular cortex? It's if you follow, for example, the work of Bud Craig, is a primary interoceptive area. It represents physiological conditions of the body. So if you feel thirst, hunger, if it's too hot, too cold, if you feel a tickle, pain, of course, yeah. These signals from the body, the periphery of the body, are transported up to the insula and then furthermore processed. And this interpretation of physiological states is, of course, also the basis of complex human emotions. Not identical, of course, but it's the basis. So if we fall in love or we totally hatred, we feel, and there's always some very strong body basis related. And there are a lot of neuroimaging and lesion studies showing, as I said, the physiological needs are related to the insular cortex, emotions, affective stimuli, anxiety, empathy, guilt are related with activity in the insular cortex, but also things like this, decision-making. Yeah? We have this pro-verbal gut feeling. Yeah? If we decide to something, then insula is involved. Music perception, which is temporal structure, emotion, and also meditative states. I'll come to this a little later. Yeah, because what do? We are doing the body scan, you're breathing in, breathing out, concentrating on yourself, and then there is activity in the insular cortex. So this some sort of strange cognitive model we had before. Maybe we can fill this up now a bit. There's still a heuristic, so to fill it up, to understand it more easily. So maybe it's the pace of these pulses. What are the pulses, these abstract things? Maybe it's then physiological states, yeah, body states, interoceptive signals from the body constantly upcoming, which are important for the encoding of direction. So you could say time is not perceived in the outside world, but through interoception by the material me. And this is, of course, what you find in Maurice Merleau-Ponty's work on embodied cognition. He basically wrote about exactly these things. Or, of course, with Thomas Fuchs, we're here in the right place, yeah, where he also shows the close connection of temporality and embodiment. So this is a more this cognitive model extended through this embodiment idea. So what does attention to time, which we had for as a question, mean now? It's attention to bodily states, yeah? And of course, increased body arousal as a second modulator. So this is this embodiment idea. And so, of course, now I have this one study. I replicated the study. I showed you the data. I replicated the study 2 years later with different subjects and in a different context. But then there was not much more happening with results on, insula is the time perception area. But in 2023 now, 2 independent meta-analyses of over 100 studies were published by 2 independent groups, yeah, with slightly different methods. And they show that only 2 regions of the brain now are related to time perception tasks. Yeah. One is the supplementary motor area, which was always a very prominent area, where I would say this relates to sensory motor timing, or in philosophical terms, to an active consciousness. Yeah? So if you have to move your time, your movements constantly, yeah, that's the SMA. And the other one is a bilateral insula, where I would say that's interoceptive time perception or embodied consciousness. The feeling of time, passage of time. And the insula actually was active across all time scales, from milliseconds to multiple seconds. So you can always ask, yeah, why is that? Nobody, besides my publication in 2010, nobody mentioned insula. Why suddenly this comes up? Yeah, because you have always multiple regions which are activated in different fMRI studies, but people have then their private favorite regions, and then let's say also frontal cortex lights up, and then they say, frontal cortex is it. Huh? But insula is always in the tables, listed in the tables. And then if you do the meta-analysis, everything goes in. Huh? It's like a filtering process, then suddenly insula pops up across all these hundreds of tasks and experiments. And this was the brain, insula, and time perception. Now going to the heartbeat. That was a study I did with Karin Meissner from Munich, or now Coburg. And we showed the same duration reproduction task I showed you before. But now we just recorded the heartbeats. And we showed that the heartbeat slows down during interval timing of multiple 6 seconds intervals. Where is the, see? Oh, this doesn't work here. And so you see here the encoding phase, you have the slowing down of the heartbeat. So the heartbeat interval gets longer, longer, longer over time. Then there's a pause, gets faster. Then there's a reproduction phase, going slower again. And then there's the intertrial interval. And this was for the 8 seconds, the 14 seconds, and even the 20 seconds interval. And so there is this linear trend, and we correlated it with the duration reproduction performance and with this positive correlation. So meaning the steeper the slope, the longer the reproduced duration. Of the steeper slope of the heartbeat, the longer the reproduced duration. So we have now a direct correlation between the heart and duration reproduction. But when you think how these are now really fascinating new results, look at Hugo Münsterberg. He was in Freiburg until 1889 or 1890. Who's Münsterberg? So he studied with Wilhelm Wundt in Leipzig, and he found in Freiburg the house still exists, one of the first experimental psychology labs. And then, by invitation of William James, moved to Harvard in 1892. But he did studies, basically the similar duration reproduction tasks, but with intervals between 6 and 16 seconds, 60 seconds. And he showed that the temporal reproductions were most accurate when the onset or offset of the intervals coincided with breathing in. So the subject didn't know about it. They were just doing the duration reproduction task, and they recorded the breathing in, breathing out, and then they found in their analysis that this was a correlation. And so the Münsterberg then, in his own words, so the super early embodiment researcher, the sense of time relies on the sensation of tension in different organs which are caused by muscle contractions. So then now you see a lot of, in this framework, you can put a lot of earlier studies in psychophysics, stimuli with emotional content are judged to last longer. Individuals with high body temperature, fever overestimate time, or time passes more slowly when smokers have a physical urge for nicotine. They took away, they were not allowed to smoke for a few hours, and then they had to judge durations, and then they totally overestimated because they were urging to have the need for the physical need for nicotine and felt it physically. Then surprise, effortful self-regulation, also overestimation of duration. So if something surprising happens and then suddenly time stops, it's slower. Or during body-focused mindfulness meditation, subjective time expands, at least at the beginning, and later on, of course, we'll talk about this, and in other states of consciousness, also time can disappear. But at the beginning, at least, you have also this time expansions. When you breathe in, breathe out, you concentrate on your body instead. Now going to psychopathology, there's of course a lot of work being done in this room, but I'm just showing now here more the results of quantitative studies. So it's very clear that at least patients with depression, anxiety, that they show this overestimation of duration when really doing psychophysical tasks. They report slowing down of subjective time or feeling stuck in the present. And work with depression. I did the work with patients with cancer and anxiety and depression, drug-dependent patients in rehab. I did this in San Diego. But also, if you just look at impulsivity as a psychiatric neurological syndrome, in many, like also borderline syndrome, there's a nice study on borderline syndromes from 2004, also showing this overestimation of duration. And here, an Italian group tried to link all this time processing, interoception, and insular activation in a mini review to show that this actually is all related with each other. So I have here a small cartoon. It's an oversimplification, of course, but you could say in many psychiatric disorders, the syndromes with symptoms, that you have people are much more in the present moment. The future is far away, and then this overestimation happens because they're overly in the present moment. Of course, it's an oversimplification, but it's still, even if you think about trauma, where you would say people are some sort of related to the past, a past traumatic event, but still it is reenacted in the present moment, in a situation, certain situation. But it could also go differently. Very interesting study, like very much by Gabriel Revaux-Dallon. He was a psychiatrist in Paris, and he had this female patient, Alexandrine, with a very curious time perception deficit. And he systematically assessed her, and she reported no sense of bodily feelings and urges. Not at all. And he also did tests with her, no reactions to ice water in the ear, I think, very mean, or with needle pricks. So she didn't respond to that. But in general, she didn't have hunger, satiety, thirst. She didn't have the need to urinate or fatigue. She didn't feel that. Also, no emotional feelings. So she could have physiological reactions of emotion when she talked about her son, that he had problems, tears could run, but she reported no feelings, no sentiment. But also no sense of time, of immediate time. So she had cognitive control of time through newspapers, daylight, nighttime, or clocks. And she also had no subjective sense of duration in seconds to hours range, she reported. She could orientate that with the clock, so she could be on time, but she didn't have the feeling of that. And the doctor also made some tests, and with different metronome speeds, so had different metronome speeds, presenting her which of these speeds was faster, the first or second, and she really did very bad on that. So here is the conclusion by Dallon. The duration perceived by consciousness is nothing less than visceral sensibility. We have something resembling internal clocks made up of various physical rhythms supplied by signals from our gut, bladder, lungs, arteries, and heart. So that's again as early as 1905. You have Hugo von Münsterberg, then Dallon, 1905. Actually, the embodiment idea. Okay, so the hypothesis is now coming to my last part, is that self-consciousness or self-body consciousness and time consciousness are both up and down regulated. So if you have an intensified awareness of the self, you have an intensified awareness of time, or of course, if you have a weakened awareness of the self, you have less awareness of time. And then in alpha states of consciousness, and that's why I'm doing this also, not because it's interesting in itself, but also it's a means to test this hypothesis. I will do studies on alpha states of consciousness. So I talked a lot about self, just putting the name out, the term, but of course, as you all know, we can differentiate between a sense of bodily self and a sense of narrative self, and sense of bodily self in several different conceptions, different words are used, but could also be minimal self. It's basically about the self-awareness in the here and now, or body awareness. The sense of narrative self is, of course, more of this extended self. We have this in Damasios or Gallagher's ideas, or getting lost in thoughts, memories, future plans. That's a narrative self. And then on a neural level, you can also make this division. So the interoceptive system, including insular cortex, is important. And for the neural level, the default mode network or the single gyrate cortical midline is very important. And latest research, of course, they're not totally independent. They cannot be. There probably is an overlap of these cells. But the latest research also shows that there's a network for the sense of I, posterior insular cortex, posterior cingulate cortex, and the precuneus. And so moving now to other states of consciousness, at least we in daily life, we know how time differs either during boredom, waiting time. You have this intense, negatively felt over-representation of time and self. But then on the other end of the spectrum, we have the flow experience, when you're totally absorbed in activity, like playing a video game, or could be anything, playing a musical instrument. And then we have this under-representation of time and self. We don't feel ourselves, and time moves very quickly. And this is, of course, the flow definition by Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi. So the components of flow experience, defined by him in the 70s in qualitative research, was that you have this intense and focused concentration on the present moment, a loss of reflective self-consciousness, and a distortion of temporal experience. And peak states are about the loss of sense of time. So we did a study with this game Thumper, yeah, which we can do in virtual reality. So we do it in 2D and virtual reality. And you have this beetle who's on this roller coaster thing, and you have this eerie music happening, and you can quite easily get into flow states. And we measured then people were for 25 minutes playing this video game. They've had exercises before, and then measured flow states with a validated questionnaire, and then asked our question about time again. And very clear, there was a more flow subject experience during the game, the faster time passed. So there's a very clear result. So in altered states of consciousness, or even stronger states of consciousness, what you have at the beginning very often is an intensified self-experience and a slowing down of time. But then at some point there is a switch. And then what you could say happens is ego dissolution or dissolution of time. And I will talk, this is the book cover of my book, Altered States of Consciousness in MIT Press. And I'll show you a little bit about meditation, floating tank, and discuss a bit the psychedelics research. So first to meditation. So what we did, we had meditators come into our lab, and you see just 22 meditators, roughly 50 years old, different meditation lineages where they came from. And they had an average experience of 90 years, so they were really experienced, and a lifetime experience of around 3,000 hours. And on average, they meditated 4 hours a week. So that defines our meditators. And what we did was really an experimental approach. So we had them meditate for 20 minutes, an intra-subject balance design, so they had both conditions and different counterbalance. And they did either a self-guided meditation, so in how they would meditate, or they read a relaxing passage from a novel in the body posture of their meditation. And then we did afterwards, we asked again about these different aspects. Here, the body sense, additionally now. So one question was, how intensive did you feel your body boundaries? It's a validated questionnaire. It had been shown to be sensitive to differences before, after meditation. And one I developed myself earlier on, how intensive did you feel your body itself? And the time perception inventories I showed you at the beginning, the visual analog scales. And very clear it was that just comparing now meditation versus the book reading condition, that meditators paid less attention to time in the meditation condition and also experienced a faster passage of time. And interestingly, in meditation, they reported these weaker body boundaries. Also not sensational, but again, I think one of the first studies to actually show this empirically, what subjectively is reported by meditators very often. So this was, the second one is now flotation tank. So this one disadvantage of these studies with experienced meditators is you have to find these experienced meditators who also should volunteer to take part in the experiments. And this is quite time consuming, and we only, over a period of 2 years, we only managed to get, well, there was also Corona as an additional problem, but we only managed to get 22 patient meditators into our study. But there's another technique with the flotation tank where we can actually get everyone in. So it's much easier to do research. Although it's a little bit more costly because you have to buy this flotation tank. So what is, so it's called flotation-REST, this technique. REST means restricted environmental stimulus technique. And so you float in water at body skin temperature, 35 degrees, in a which is super saturated with Epsom salt, so magnesium sulfate. And so you totally float in this warm environment, and there's no stimulation through external senses. You don't hear anything, light is switched off, and very comfortable. And at the beginning, very similar to meditation, you have an increased awareness of time through increased interoception. You suddenly feel your heart beating, you're feeling your breathing in, you feel your interoceptive self, and time passes maybe slowly. But then later during the float, you get into very deep meditative type states, a loss of sense of self and time. Or can get, but you need a little practice. Maybe you have to go step into 2-3 times to get accustomed to the whole environment. But then that's what happens is what I call instant meditation. So you don't need thousands of hours of meditation experience. You have immediately the relaxation response. That's always the case, even if you don't get into deep experiences. And you have a decreased mind wandering. One of the main features of meditation is you have this decreased mind wandering. And we just published this study, our very first study on these quantitative results, and just to highlight the main results. So again, in experimental psychology, you need the two conditions, your experimental condition, your control condition, and experimental, of course, was a flotation tank, 60 minutes floating versus 60 minutes resting on a waterbed. Why do we do this? Because, of course, people will say, oh, if at home, if I'm in my bed and it's all cozy and warm, it's dark, and I'm totally relaxed, oh, why would we need a flotation tank which costs 35,000 euros? Yeah? So we had this control condition for a waterbed, cost us 1,500 euros. Yeah? And in this little room, so interestingly, that's in a private practice where we have the facilities. There's also salt stones around. You have these salt grottos, yeah, very often. So even there's a little salty air similar to our, but that's just a coincidence, or a positive coincidence, just like the salty atmosphere in the floating tank. When we switch off the light, they don't hear anything. They just lie totally comfortable, horizontal on the flotation. And then 60 minutes, and then we come intra-subject design. People do both, counterbalanced order, and then we ask all our questions again. And we had an explicit question on time distortion, and people reported more time distortion in the flotation tank than in the waterbed situation, and the body boundaries dissolved more extremely in the flotation tank than in the control condition. Then also, is this an altered state of consciousness? There's a phenomenology of consciousness inventory, a validated questionnaire to assess different states of consciousness, and that have 2 subscales on altered experience, altered state, and these actually correlated with the time distortion and the body boundaries questions, and even more with the body boundaries, as you see here, than with the time distortion. But but they correlate with both of these variables. And if you do and this is now interesting fact I'll come to explain now in a minute. When we do a mediation analysis, flotation rest versus bed rest, flotation rest leads, not only has a direct effect on anxiety, so less anxiety after flotation versus bed rest, but also this is mediated through the weakened body boundaries. So in the flotation rest, people have weakened body boundaries, and this weakened body boundaries lead to less anxiety. I come to this in a second because it's interesting for one question of whether you need altered states of consciousness as a healing process in different assessment techniques or induction techniques of altered states of consciousness, like in psychedelics. So in psychedelics, I did a study with Franz Vollenweider in Zurich on time perception. Also, this duration reproduction was very sensitive to the effects of psilocybin, but there are now, you can say, hundreds of studies out on LSD, psilocybin, ayahuasca, mescaline, and the Vollenweider lab did an overview of their subjective questionnaire, and there's one subscale called oceanic boundlessness scale, and over 400, 500 subjects over the years, decades, they assessed, and what you see as item correlations, and look especially at these item correlations, is that together in the subscale you have ego dissolution, dissolution of time, and feeling of disembodiment. So this is the effects of psychedelics on all these 3 components, time and self, bodily self. There's Benny Shannon from Israel, who did a lot of research with ayahuasca. And just if you have a look here, what you see as what happens during ayahuasca intake, different temporalities, and the modified temporality is the cessation of time, modified rate of flow, confusion of order, confusion of directionality. A lot of things can happen there, but he says also as a peak experience of you can have no time, no self. So coming now to the end, yeah, so altered states of consciousness and psychiatric syndromes, maybe this has also treatment potentials. So this is the idea now coming up, voiced, that because in many psychiatric syndromes, at least like in depression or anxiety, you have this hyper-awareness of self and time, the rumination, mind-wandering of the narrative self. And the core features of altered states of consciousness are opposing these symptoms. Yeah? So because you have less awareness of self and time and a decrease of mind-wandering. So this could be, of course, in the context of psychotherapy, one additional way to treat the symptoms. And here by my colleague Justin Feinstein from Tulsa, where I did extensive flotation experience before I bought my own, he showed in 2008 in this PLOS ONE article that 50 patients with anxiety and depression undergoing one session of float had these short-term anxiolytic and antidepressant had these effects during floating rest. And they're now expanding. There are more publications coming out. How long does it last? It seems like 48 hours at least after one session. And now they're trying to, how often do you have to go into flotation rest that you have a more stable influence? And these are all the things that are happening right now. So, yeah, so just a recap, this is my agenda, looking about extended present moment experience, totally underrepresented in science. So I don't know why, and maybe more people will come up with ideas. Then I talked about embodied time passage, self and time, how they are related, and about timelessness and selflessness. So again, even with there, you can show this up and down regulation of subjective time and self. And here are the sponsors. I just want, for the Germans, I just want to show you, we managed that the Hans Seidel Stiftung, which is the Stiftung from the CSU, the Conservative Party of Bavaria, where I come from, they sponsored our Floatation-REST study. So, but there are also more sponsors. Thank you for listening.